Chapter 51. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Brunhilde breathed a sigh of relief knowing she could make a request as part of the deal. This meant there was room to negotiate the first emperor's participation in Ragnarok. Any request, hopefully, it wasn't too crazy. Brunhilde felt a knot of anxiety tighten. You will become my artifact. That was the first emperor's request. To Brunhilde, it was both expected and unexpected. If the first emperor wanted to be paired with a Valkyrie, she figured he'd go for the eldest sister. She believed she was worthy of being his artifact. What surprised her was how reasonable the first emperor seemed to be. Brunhilde is honored to be His Majesty's artifact. She agreed without a moment's hesitation. Whatever it took, she'd agree first. The power dynamic was overwhelming, otherwise, she might not even make it back. The instant she agreed, she felt the emperor's gaze intensify, making her skin crawl. It felt like he was dissecting her, studying every element of what made Brunhilde who she was. No, more accurately, he wanted to study what it meant to be a god, to understand the difference between humans and gods, and the origin of demigods. Was she about to become a lab rat? A wave of fear washed over her, raising goosebumps on her skin. Her pupils constricted as the figure at the end of the hall rose and walked toward her, step by step. When he was close enough to touch her, Brunhilde entertained a desperate thought of escape. Then let me see this so-called divine weapon. His voice was soft, almost conversational, but laced with unyielding authority. Especially this close, Brunhilde was enveloped by his aura, feeling an unprecedented pressure. Trembling, she reached out and touched the emperor before her. She couldn't tell if it was pure fear forcing her hand forward, or if his words, like spells, were controlling her body, lifting her arm and making her touch him. Elder sister, Randgriz could only scream silently. If she could, she'd speak out, but the emperor's presence paralyzed her. Valkyrie Brunhilde, divine weapon transformation. Brunhilde spoke, her voice shaky. For better or worse, there was no avoiding it. She might as well just comply. The moment she finished speaking, she felt herself merging with him. No. It felt like the first emperor was trying to devour her. She felt a force attaching to her, seeping through her clothes, eroding her body, her skin, penetrating every cell, even her soul. Her sense of self blurred. She felt like she was being broken down. Every element of Brunhilde was being analyzed. Her consciousness faded, and she sank into darkness. Then, like a person gasping for air after nearly suffocating, she inhaled sharply, like waking from a nightmare. Her breathing was erratic. Sister, sister. Someone was calling her. Randgriz standing right in front of her. It sounded like a shout, but to Brunhilde, it felt distant, like she was going deaf. Plus, Randgriz's figure seemed to split into two, then overlap. Her vision was messed up, but this only lasted a few seconds before her sight gradually returned to normal. I'm fine. Straightening up, Brunhilde looked ahead. The first emperor was gone, already back on his throne. You may return now. The emperor said, motionless. The next second, the scene shimmered and shifted. Though it was a new scene, it was still the hall where government affairs were held. They were back in the outside world, connected to the Akasha system once more. After one last look at the hall, Brunhilde chose to return to the Akasha room. Sister Brind, Sister Randgriz. A childish voice, full of joy and relief. Gray. Randgriz gave their youngest sister a gentle look and embraced her. Sister Brand. After hugging the gentle sister, Gray flew towards the other, but. Randgriz, what did I become after I transformed into the artifact? Brunhilde, holding out her hand and stopping Gray's advance, threw her to the side with a playful glare. Wait, Sister Brender, you transformed into a divine weapon? Gray said in astonishment, then clamped her hand over her mouth, as if she had spoken too loudly and had to be careful not to let other gods hear. After all, only the Valkyrie sisters knew about the Valkyrie's ability to become weapons, so, Sister Brun said she had just become an artifact. Wouldn't that require summoning someone into reality? Also, whose artifact did Sister Brun become? The first emperor's? Randgriz looked confused, unsure how to answer. Didn't her sister know what happened? I don't know about this. You're not sure? Brunhilde raised an eyebrow. Because my sister was completely enveloped in light, it was so dazzling. I couldn't see anything. After the light disappeared, my sister was just suddenly back here. Randgriz looked apologetic, feeling completely useless. There's no need to look like that, Randgriz. Brynhild gently stroked her sister's face. No one could have predicted this outcome, then, she frowned slightly. Ragnarok was about to begin, and the sounds of the spectators on the other side of the arena were already audible. There wasn't enough time to observe history, but simply watching it on a screen, a flat image, made it easy to miss key details. Only by feeling personally involved in that era could you truly pay attention, and now, I've discovered that these special characters are all ace level. Does this mean we have to use one in the first round? Besides, it's not like they have a choice. As proud kings, they'd want to be the finale, not the opening act. It's a real headache. What should I do? Now they need to choose someone to play the first game, immediately. Chapter 52. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The first battle of Ragnarok is crucial. Brunhilde desperately wanted to win the opening round. It would mean everything, but all the kings they'd found were trump cards. Should they really use one now? Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, was too arrogant. He'd want to make a grand finale appearance, and the first emperor? Definitely not a first-round pick. He'd demand an opponent worthy of his stature, a god, maybe even a chief god, that left King Solomon. Another enigma. He probably wouldn't want to go first, either, so, she had to choose from her original favorites. The first match would likely feature Thor, the god of thunder. They said his power rivaled the chief gods. Which of her favorites could stand against him? This guy. Sis, are you planning to send him in the first round? A virtual panel displayed a brutal-looking man, a figure from Eastern history. Lubu, the mightiest warrior of the Three Kingdoms era. Brunhilde had brought him to the council, one of the candidates Tang had proposed before the twilight of the gods. Yeah. Originally, Brunhilde planned to have this madman kick things off. Then, Randagrith, I'm counting on you. Brunhilde addressed her sister with a serious tone. Counting on Randagrith? Could it be? Gal, standing nearby, was stunned. She understood what was happening, and her face grew tense. The plan was for Randagrith to become Lubu's Voland, forging herself into a weapon capable of fighting a god, but did she really want her sister to be this guy's weapon? While the two sisters were observing history, Gal had browsed the records out of boredom. Her sister had mentioned Lubu. After watching Lubu's past, Gal didn't trust Randagrith around him. He reveled in slaughter, then spouted nonsense. He had utter contempt for life. Gal hated him, and he scared her. It would be better if Gilgamesh or Solomon used her sister as a weapon. At least their cruelty was reserved for gods. But then again, did those two kings even need a Valkyrie as a weapon? Solomon commanded 72 demon gods. He definitely didn't need one, and Gilgamesh seemed to have artifacts coming out of his ears. No need for a sister, right? No, Brand, he's awful. You don't know how brutal he is. Gal protested. She didn't want her beautiful sister Randagrith paired with someone like that. I've made my decision. It's him. I'm relying on you, Randagrith. Choosing Randagrith wasn't random. Her abilities perfectly complemented Lubu's combat prowess. Time to summon him. Ready. But. Brunhilde frowned. Lubu's virtual panel glowed halfway, then abruptly stalled. Brand, what's happening? Gal tensed. The panel suddenly turned black, not just dark, it was as if ink had been poured over it, staining it black. Then, a black light flashed, and everything went dark. When their vision returned. Brenda! Gal screamed. A hand had suddenly grabbed her sister's neck and lifted her into the air. I told you not to summon this guy, who treated life like it was nothing. See? He attacked a Valkyrie the moment he arrived. Who gave you permission to give my woman to someone else? The voice was cold, chilling the air. Who are you? Brunhilde, gasping for air, recognized the voice instantly. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She hadn't expected him to see Randagrith as his She'd overlooked him, distracted by the power of the kings. Like being blind in broad daylight, but was he going to answer the call himself? Did he want to kick Lu Bu out and fight in the first round, as one of humanity's 13 champions? If so, he'd be a better fit than Lu Bu. Randigriff, standing next to her, recognized the voice too. Her eyes were filled with concern for her sister, and something else. Lord Overlord, Randigriff murmured, did he really love her? Did he want her to be his Voland? Sadly, he was just a figure in history. No, wait, maybe he could be alive. If his soul was transferred to a mechanical body, he could live longer, but could it survive for 2,000 years? Overlord, Gaul was confused. Did Lu Bu have another name? No, this wasn't Lu Bu, otherwise, the sisters wouldn't react like this. The blackened panel flickered, revealing an image, a handsome man, with a refined face and a powerful build. Most noticeable were his eyes, double pupils. The panel expanded to the size of a door, and the man stepped through. As the virtual image became real, Gaul felt a terrifying murderous aura. He was clearly a madman who'd slaughtered countless people. His muscular frame was as imposing as Thor's, making Gaul feel like she'd be crushed. If he so much as slapped her, she'd be flattened. Terrified, Gaul still mustered the courage to open her mouth. Let go of Bren. His double-pupiled gaze flicked towards her. For a split second, Gaul felt as if she was about to die. An icy terror flooded her, her courage vanished, and she fell silent. His Majesty sent me to fight on behalf of mankind, first. Chapter 53. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Two figures descended the spiral staircase toward a viewing platform. Even before reaching the top, I could hear the roar of the crowd in the arena. The noise included the gods, each one clamoring about how they'd look good to the humans. They were also taunting another group of spectators, humans from all eras of Earth. The din was so loud you could barely make out a human voice. It wasn't that the god side was larger, but their voices were just unbelievably louder. Most of the humans didn't have much hope for this Ragnarok battle. Actually, it wasn't a lack of hope, but more a sense of confusion and helplessness. To most people, a battle between humans and gods was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot with its bare arms. It was a hopeless struggle. Some were even more pessimistic, wishing the whole thing would be called off. Fighting was just asking for humiliation, making humanity's defeat even uglier. Bryn, is he really that good? Gray, trailing her older sister, still felt uneasy. Even though he was a powerful figure from human history, supposedly even stronger than Lu Bu, could he really win? Her sister said he'd be fighting in the first round. And the god representing them would likely be Lord Thor. Could he actually pull it off? Thor was known as the strongest in Norse mythology. Whether he could beat Odin was another question, but his power was definitely god level. We'll find out when we see the match, Brynhild replied calmly. At the same time, she was wondering who the Emperor had sent to fight on his behalf. Did that mean the Emperor himself wasn't planning to get involved? Okay. Gray didn't press further, sensing her sister was in a bad mood. More questions would probably just make her angry. The exit was less than 10 steps away. She could feel the gods' presence, hear their brutal voices. Their cruel words made Gray shrink back. Emerging from the stairs, Gray's eyes were drawn to the massive arena. Some of the gods noticed them. The looks they gave her sister, like they wanted to devour her, frightened her all over again. Brunhilde, just watch the human you chose get slaughtered. Is this a joke? A demigod thinks humans can fight us gods. Is this your plan to humiliate humanity before its demise? I can't wait to see Brunhilde's twisted, helpless face as she watches humans get tortured. You gonna cry, right? The cynicism was relentless then. If you do cry, you can always throw yourself into my arms and let me comfort you, little Brunhilde. The loudest voice came from Zeus, the main god of Greek mythology, who was leering and blowing kisses at her sister. So gross, you old perv. She could only curse him in her head, unable to voice her disgust. But can you please stop staring, you disgusting old man? Her sister said without hesitation, making Gray freeze. Suddenly, the noise stopped. The clarion call of the end is about to sound once more. Heimdall, the final gatekeeper of the arena and the announcer for Ragnarok, was giving a passionate speech. The battle between humans and gods will begin, and the rules are simple. If one party dies, the other wins. In other words, no surrender. Once you stand in this arena, only one side can survive. This announcement was met with roaring cheers from the gods, eager to see the carnage of gods against humans. It's finally starting, Bryn. Gray swallowed, knowing the first fighters were about to be announced. Who would be the first god? So, in the first round, the vanguard for the gods is. Who could it be? Heimdall waved his arms toward the exit. The door opened, unleashing a terrifying aura. The passage was deep, obscuring the figure, but flashes of violent electricity could be seen. Just as her sister predicted, the vanguard of the gods was. Every god wants to witness his true power. He lives and dies for battle. His thunder hammer shatters the earth. Yes, he is the strongest thunder warrior in the north. The berserker, Thor. The announcement of the god's name sent a wave of cheers that shook the entire arena. The thunder god appeared in full view. Handsome and burly, he held a thunder hammer crackling with lightning, bigger than an adult's body. He exuded a terrifying aura, making the gods feel like they were carrying a mountain on their backs. A single glance into the thunder god's eyes instilled fear, forcing them to lower their heads. After the god's vanguard was announced, the humans grew even more pessimistic. They didn't expect such a heavy hitter in the first round. Bryn, is this going to be okay? Can we really win? Gray had lost all confidence. Why couldn't it be King Gilgamesh or King Solomon? King Gilgamesh would be the best. He was the monster who killed a god. Gray, are you kidding? You don't throw away your best card in the first game. Just watch. Okay. Gray shrunk back after being scolded. Now, the vanguard representing the humans who dare challenge the gods is, this man. From the other exit emerged a man no less imposing than Thor. Xiang Yu, the overlord of Western Chu, the most heroic figure in human history. Chapter 54. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Battle of Julu destroyed the main Qin army, leading to the dynasty's collapse and the rise of Western Chu. Most people at the time figured this new overlord would reunite the lands, becoming the next emperor to unify the country, but history tells us this guy was stubborn and kept making bad calls, which ultimately led to him being cornered at Gaixia by the king of Han. Feeling too ashamed to face his people back in Jiangdong, the overlord offed himself in the Wujiang River, and just like that, an era's heroes came to an end. But is that the whole story? Historians often say the overlord was a brave powerhouse, unmatched in his time, but not that great a military mind. Is that true? If he was really so inept, how could he have pulled off that impossible victory at Julu? Leading just 20,000 soldiers against an army of 400,000, he turned a losing battle into a win. Is that something just anyone with a lot of muscle can do? Absolutely not. Heimdall announced, introducing the overlord. He was staring wide-eyed at a piece of parchment in his hand. This wasn't your average parchment. It looked more like a tablet covered in parchment, connected to the Akasya system. The overlord only lost because he was ordered to withdraw from that era by the first emperor. The announcement stunned the entire venue. Those who didn't know the overlord's history were confused, but those who did were shocked. Wait a minute, I thought Xiang Yu's biggest achievement was overthrowing the Qin dynasty. How can you say the first emperor ordered him to withdraw? Those two were enemies. Now you're making Xiang Yu sound like an agent of the first emperor. What's going on here? The scene shifted to a corner of the auditorium, where Emperor Gao of Han, the dynasty's founder, was sitting. He's right, the country I got was basically handed to me by the overlord. I didn't really defeat him, Emperor Gao said with a wry smile. No, I should say, the country I got was given to me by him, he repeated, now with a respectful tone. Only later did he learn the truth, and only then did he realize the scope of the man's plan, the immense burden he carried. That one? Who is His Majesty talking about? Could it be? Some of the courtiers beside him were clueless, while others looked shocked as they began to understand. A few, however, knew exactly what was being discussed, because they were in on it from the start. The one emperor for all time, the first emperor. Emperor Gao of Han declared. In that era, the gods didn't interfere, and he could have unified the world and ruled all of mankind. That the revelation sent shockwaves through the listeners. Your Majesty, You'll understand as you read on. The first emperor must be watching this too, and I'm really looking forward to his reaction. Not just humans would be shocked, but even the gods. I think the first emperor anticipated all this. Knowing humanity would eventually face a situation like this, he prepared for it before withdrawing from history, before vanishing from the god's sight. Oh. If the gods don't interfere, he could have ruled the world. All of mankind. Zeus, sitting in the main auditorium, stroked his beard, intrigued by the emperor's words. Lord Zeus, perhaps we should pay closer attention to the human representatives from that region, Hermes, ever the gentleman, suggested. Their mythological system had changed drastically. Where they used to be heavily involved for thousands of years, the pantheon now seemed closed off, rarely interacting with others. They hadn't attended the last few millennia of conferences. They only came this time, and with new gods. And you agreed? Just like that. Something's fishy. Mythology over there has been closely tied to humans for ages. Logically, they wouldn't agree to this. The fact that they agreed so easily makes me think there's something else going on. Combined with Emperor Gao's statement, it's clear that the representatives chosen from that region are extraordinary. What's to pay attention to? It's more fun if the opponent's interesting. It'd be boring to just crush them right away. Zeus said, with a kind smile that somehow felt cruel, but no matter what, Xiang Yu, the overlord in the arena, looked undeniably human. That's a human, right, Odin? I'd better double-check with this guy to be sure. They are indeed human. They don't appear to have any divine blood. Odin, the highest god in Norse mythology, replied dryly. He still couldn't understand the Valkyrie's audacity, thinking these humans could stand a chance against the gods. God-slaying? Seriously? Speaking of which, will Brunhild summon that guy? Because that one's a dragon slayer. Sure, Odin could wipe out a dragon with a flick of the wrist, but for a human to kill one? That's pretty impressive, and with whatever else Brunhild has prepared, he might actually give a god a run for their money. Odin knew exactly what Brunhild had planned, but he chose to keep quiet. In his opinion, Brunhild's preparations were barely enough to deal with some lesser gods. Against someone like Thor, it was like throwing an egg at a brick wall. Brunhild doesn't even know Thor's true power. Let her experience despair. Let her see how futile resistance is. She'll despair as the person she chose is turned to ash, as her sisters fade away. That's the consequence of her choice. Odin smirked. Let the betrayer savor despair. Woo-woo, that the horn of doom has been sounded. The first battle of Ragnarok begins. Chapter 56. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The entire arena went silent. The terrifying lightning strike that was about to obliterate Xiang Yu vanished. It was bizarre. What just happened? Thor's lightning disappeared. Was he just trying to scare him? Nah, I bet he thought it was overkill and just cancelled it. Some of the gods were completely lost, their godly vision failing them. Hence the comments, but those gods who could see what happened were in shock. Are you kidding me? That human just crushed Thor's lightning. That they were having a crisis of faith, questioning their own senses. The gods who had a clearer view, their earlier contempt now gone, just looked on in silence. Well, this is getting interesting. Zeus, the Greek god, grinned, a truly vicious smile. If that human had merely survived Thor's lightning, even unscathed, it would have been a surprise. But this was more than just a surprise. That human had obliterated the lightning before it hit. That was the shocking part. And the speed of it. So, what changed? This new performance was a complete departure from what came before. Was it the weapon? Was the secret to his power hidden within it? Ultimately, it was still a human and a weapon going up against a god. So what was going on here? Zeus turned an interested gaze toward the Valkyrie. Sis, what happened? Gray asked, confused. She had closed her eyes as the lightning struck, not because of the glare, but because she couldn't bear to witness the aftermath. She was convinced Xiang Yu would be pulverized, leaving nothing behind. And the human spectators would be crushed by the overwhelming difference in power, but the expected cataclysm never came. Instead, there was just silence. She cautiously opened her eyes to find nothing, then came the audience's confusion. "If you want to know, try keeping your eyes open," Brunhilde replied, a sly smile directed at the gods. Then, she looked back at the figure in the arena. He had far surpassed her expectations. He'd actually scattered Thor's lightning. It was a moment that changed history for gods and humans alike. "Right," Grey nodded, not pressing her sister for an explanation. She could piece things together from the other spectators, but before she could listen to those who understood what had happened, the two warriors in the arena clashed. They disappeared in an instant. No, they hadn't vanished. They were just moving so fast the eye couldn't keep up. When their forms reappeared, they were face to face in the center of the arena. Boom, star, the dull thud of metal on metal. The compressed force of the impact exploded outwards in every direction. A shockwave ripped through the arena. This arena had been specially reinforced. Had the fight been in an arena like those in the human world, the first strike would have shattered it instantly. This is incredible," Heimdall, the gatekeeper and referee, exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. Before him, the two fighters traded blows at a speed he could barely track. In a blink, they had clashed countless times. Each swing and impact generated heat. The friction between the weapon's speed and the air generated even more. The temperature around the two fighters was rising rapidly. "It's impossible to tell who has the upper hand," Heimdall's voice trailed off. It wasn't so much that he couldn't tell, but that he was starting to lose track, and the one starting to crack was Thor. Suddenly, Xiang Yu's ferocious upward strike sent Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, flying. Then, with two more lightning-fast strikes, he shattered Thor's iron gloves into countless fragments. At that moment, Xiang Yu did something shocking. He stopped attacking and casually tossed his spear aside. Logically, he should have pressed his advantage after stripping Thor of his gloves and weapon, but he just gave it up. Was he planning to fight barehanded? Thinking that would be somehow fairer? "What are you doing?" Grey shrieked, tugging at her hair. "Fairness? Now. Had Xiang Yu lost his mind? What's he thinking?" Brunhilde muttered, bewildered. He had destroyed Thor's artifact and was on the verge of victory, yet he threw away his weapon. What was his plan? Did he seriously think he could win a fistfight? And what if Thor just picked up his hammer again? Except, he couldn't. Thor's iron gloves, Jarngraper, were there to protect his hands. Without them, he couldn't withstand Mjolnir's power. That's why Brunhilde had planned to send her fourth sister, Rangriz, to fight. Her specialty was destroying artifacts like Thor's gauntlets, so he couldn't wield Mjolnir. Suddenly, her expression changed. She sensed Xiang Yu severing his connection to the weapon. What was he planning? Did he really think Thor was powerless without his artifacts and he could win with just human strength? How arrogant could one guy get? Then, he spoke, shocking everyone. "The thing that suppressed your power is gone. Show me your true power, Thor." Chapter 57. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Brunhilde shared intel on Thor, explaining that Mjolnir, his hammer, contains so much power that it can backfire on the user without proper safeguards. Thor's iron gloves, Jarngraper, are said to provide that protection. That's why Randy Grace, the fourth of the 13 Valkyrie sisters, was chosen. As a Valkyrie, Randy Grace can transform into a weapon with shield-breaking properties. The idea was that Thor's iron gloves acted as armor, and Randy Grace could deliver a special attack to destroy them, preventing him from wielding Mjolnir effectively. Without his hammer, Thor's power would be diminished, increasing humanity's chances of victory. This was Brunhilde's strategy, but one fighter had other ideas. Initially, he hadn't considered the artifact at all. He wanted to see how much damage he could inflict on Thor in a purely human state, but the results were underwhelming. Later, he practiced with Randy Grace, to gain insights into the unique human-god integration and gather more data. During the fight with Thor, he noticed something odd. Brunhilde's intel might be flawed. The claim that the iron gauntlets protected Thor seemed incorrect. The intensity of their duel suggested that Thor's desire to fight was growing stronger, almost as if he wanted to unleash his full power. He observed that Thor's attacks, which should have been more ferocious, were actually being restrained by the gloves. It felt like Thor, the god of thunder, was impatient and eager to discard this limitation to unleash his true strength. The only reason he was holding back was that he hadn't yet seen power here that was enough for Thor to do this, so, Thor held both expectation and disappointment. Then, he simply pushed the human god integration to its limit and destroyed Thor's iron gauntlet. Immediately, he sensed a surge of untamed power about to erupt from his opponent. Now this was interesting. He was also preparing to mechanically ascend, so the two of them could fight at their absolute best. This had become less about the purpose of Ragnarok and more about two warriors finding worthy opponents for an all-out battle. Then, in a surprising twist, he added a bit of a taunt. Huh? What did he say, Brunhilde? Gray asked from the audience, confused. Xiang Yu said he destroyed the thing suppressing Thor, so he can use his real power. What does that even mean? The suppressed thing must be the iron gauntlets, Gray guessed. But aren't those supposed to protect Thor? How could they be suppressing him? I don't know, Brunhilde admitted, her expression turning serious. The human champion wouldn't be spouting nonsense. If what he said was true, then her information about Thor was wrong. The situation in the arena was intensifying. Mjolnir was melting the ground. It looked like it would burn straight through if someone didn't stop it. Most of the gods in the audience were panicking, claiming Thor couldn't use Mjolnir without the iron gauntlets. This confirmed that they shared the same belief as Brunhilde, that the gauntlets were for Thor's protection. Whoa, what is that? Gray suddenly recoiled, as if startled by a heartbeat. The sound seemed to be coming from Mjolnir itself. The hammer's outer metal casing was cracking open, revealing something fleshy and unsettling inside. It looked like some kind of bizarre creature was trapped within. Brunhilde witnessed this too, her expression growing increasingly grave, especially after Thor declared that Mjolnir had finally awakened. She glanced at Zeus, the perverted old man, who, instead of panicking, wore an amused expression. He clearly wasn't worried about Thor losing. He was anticipating an even more interesting turn of events. As if sensing her gaze, Zeus turned his unnerving eyes towards her. Little sister Brunhilde, you look puzzled. Let me explain. There's a misconception about Mjolnir and Jarngrape. So, the information she had was indeed incorrect, which made Brunhilde's expression quite ugly. Did you know? The gloves weren't to protect Thor from Mjolnir's power, but the other way around. The other way around? You mean? Yes, the gloves were actually preventing Thor's raw power from shattering the pre-awakened Mjolnir instantly. Thor's true strength was being suppressed. Zeus's words caused Brunhilde's face to pale. Thor's true power could easily shatter Mjolnir. Wait, the pre-awakened Mjolnir? That means the current Mjolnir is awakening and will become even more terrifying, and Thor's true power is no longer suppressed. Feeling hopeless, little sister Brunhilde? Want to come cry in my arms? Brunhilde ignored Zeus's taunts, her eyes fixed on the arena, her face grim. If that's the case, then humanity is. It's over. There's no way we can win. Gray muttered, despairingly. It's not time to give up yet, Gray. Brunhilde insisted, believing Xiang Yu must have some kind of backup plan. She had some speculations about what that plan might be, but no concrete idea. Xiang Yu was finally bringing out his trump card. He gestured, and a massive metal container appeared out of thin air behind him. This kind of sudden appearance didn't surprise the gods. The summoned humans could freely summon items from their lifetimes. With a series of mechanical whirs, several huge cables shot out from the metal container, grabbing Xiang Yu's limbs and hoisting him up to the box. Thunk, star, there was the sound of metal piercing flesh. The entire audience was stunned, speechless. Chapter 58. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The arena went dead silent. Even the god side, who had been cheering Thor on as he readied his true power, were abruptly silenced, frozen in place as if time itself had stopped. Everyone stared, astonished, at Thor's opponent. Could he be doing this because he knew he was no match for Thor in his full power? Something felt off, deeply unsettling. Sister Brend, sis. Gray stammered, his tongue feeling thick and clumsy. He'd assumed Overlord Xiangyu had some kind of ace up his sleeve, but this was terrifying. He glanced sideways at his sister. She looked surprised, too, but not panicked. Almost expectant. What was there to expect? What could possibly be good about this? This round was as good as lost. What is he doing? Hermes, ever the gentleman, stood beside Zeus, utterly bewildered. He couldn't fathom what Xiangyu was up to. Suicide, surely not. Who knows? But it's getting interesting. I'm eager to see what happens next. Zeus chuckled. This human gave up his weapon and grabbed a metal box instead, thinking whatever's inside could compare to a Valkyrie transformation. Color me surprised. After pushing Thor to unleash his full power, this human acts like he can do the same. The arrogance. Does he think only a serious, all-in Thor deserves his own real power? Huh. Loki frowned. He could sense Xiangyu's life force fading, dying. What was going on? What's happening? Why is Xiangyu's metal box attacking him? Is this death? It's over. The uproar finally erupted, a wave of noise crashing over both the human and divine audiences. Most looked on in confusion as they watched a halberd pierce the top of the metal box, impaling Xiangyu, who was being held aloft. It looked fatal, any way you slice it. Xiangyu was a big dude. An ordinary person would have been cleaved in two. Bright red blood gushed from the wound, soaking the metal crimson. Suddenly, the blood seemed to seep into the metal box. Was the box eating the blood? More accurately, Xiangyu's body was collapsing, dissolving into dust. So, the blood-stained metal box seemed to absorb the blood, giving off the impression it was eating the blood. The whole scene felt like a sacrifice, as if Xiangyu was offering himself up to summon something. Sacrifice? No, using himself as a sacrifice to summon some kind of monster. Is this even a fair fight between humans and gods anymore? Some were even considering the possibility of summoning monsters through sacrifice. As a sacrifice in exchange for help against Thor. If that's the case, let's see if that's even allowed. Heimdall, the announcer for the Ragnarok battle, frantically flipped through the rule book, searching for guidance on such a situation. Nothing. Apparently, that wasn't covered. Just then, with Xiangyu's body completely gone, the metal box finally stirred, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. When the cracks became too numerous to count, the entire metal box shattered like porcelain. Everyone watched with bated breath, eyes wide, desperate not to miss a single detail of what would emerge from within. That even Gray, who had zero expectations, was stunned into silence. The entire audience was speechless. There's another Overlord Xiangyu in there. Twins. That can't be right. Chaos erupted on the human side. Two people. Is that what's happening? Were you guys just praising some magic trick? Many of the gods were equally perplexed. Oh. Shiva, who had been lounging, sat up straight. This human's aura was completely different from before. He had been able to sense the aura of life, but now it felt cold, dead. Inside this body, Shiva sensed a violent power, as strong as Thor. It made his blood pump, and he found himself anticipating a battle with her. Unfortunately, this battle belonged to Thor. Brunhilde really knows how to make sure things are exciting, doesn't she? What will happen next? Shiva was looking forward to the next battle. He was now planning to participate in the Battle of Ragnarok. How could he miss such a spectacle? Here we go. Two people who have revealed their true abilities will start their first battle. Humanity's future hangs in the balance. In the first battle of Ragnarok, both sides have shown their true strength. Who will win? Heimdall shouted, and the two people looked at each other excitedly. Thor raised Mjolnir above his head with both hands. He was watching with excitement. The release of unprecedented terrifying energy made him suspect that as long as he touched it, he would be wiped out. Xiangyu, halberd in hand, assumed a battle stance. As he gathered power, lines of light appeared within his body. These lights pierced through his clothes, flickering like flames. It was eerie. Boom! Explosions rocked the ground where they stood, but not from any attack. it was the pure force of their launching at alarming speeds. They were so fast that most couldn't even see them move. Only the explosions remained. Before the sound of the explosions reached the audience, a huge explosion in the center of the arena had already engulfed everything. Chapter 59. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The explosion wasn't some energy blast. It was the raw force of their collision, compressed to the breaking point. Instantly, that force radiated outwards, creating a shockwave that sucked all the air out of the arena, leaving a vacuum. What a sight! Heimdall yelled, hyped, but no sound came out. The impact had literally created a vacuum, stopping the sound. Still, the sound wasn't just trapped. The other viewers could hear his live commentary thanks to his abilities. Otherwise, how could he possibly project his voice across this massive arena with just a normal speaking voice? Whoa! Heimdall yelped, awkwardly jumping away. His original spot was now radioactive from the clash. A crack had ripped across the arena floor, right where he'd been standing. Another second, and he'd have been launched. Even as he was speaking, the two fighters were locked in a brutal exchange, weapons meeting again and again. Each strike made the arena groan, threatening to tear it apart. The spectators watched, shocked, starting to panic. Every blow sent tremors through the entire structure. Would it collapse? To top it off, Thor's hammer was radiating heat. The arena's temperature was rising fast. Sweat beaded on Heimdall's chin, evaporating before it even hit the ground. Unbelievable. Lord Thor is going all out. What about that human? He just died and came back. What's going on? Most of the gods couldn't believe what they were seeing. A human was actually matching Thor, who could easily wipe out most of them. Did that mean humans could too? Some of the gods started sweating. They'd been talking trash, and now they were afraid they'd get what was coming to them. Can humans really be this strong? Maybe we can win. Man can defeat God. Xiang Yu is a true hero. The humans were ecstatic, cheering for the champion who represented their future. Second brother, do you think he can win? Lu Xuanda asked Guan Yu. Guan Yu wasn't summoned from history to be an audience member. He had become a god and was now here as an Eastern deity. He knew more than Lu Xuanda did. It's hard to say. Guan Yu was uncertain. He knew how powerful Xiang Yu was, and that most gods were no match for him. But Thor was a formidable opponent. The outcome was uncertain. If that person fought, Guan Yu believed they'd win. That person was a legend. They practically invented myth. Brunhilde, it looks like he can win. Gray, who had been losing hope, was now excited. She hadn't realized Thor was holding back, and she hadn't expected Xiang Yu to be able to keep up. It was incredible, but Randy Grace had been pushed aside. Did that mean Xiang Yu wasn't borrowing her power anymore? If so, he was matching Thor on his own. Who was this Xiang Yu? Wasn't he supposed to have been defeated by Liu Bang and committed suicide? Did that mean Liu Bang could have defeated him? Maybe the history she knew was different, like with Gilgamesh. Yeah, Brunhilde replied, pleased. She hadn't expected the artificial humans to be so powerful. If they could mass-produce them, humans might start judging the gods. Of course, she doubted they could mass-produce anything this powerful. Most gods couldn't tell the truth about Xiang Yu's condition, but Zeus probably had an idea. Oh. Zeus murmured, raising an eyebrow. Xiang Yu wasn't human anymore. He had electronic eyes. Was his whole body a man-made construct? Could they build something like this back then? They could make puppets, but this was something else. Were the gods over there helping? It was strange that none of the heavy hitters from that side had shown up. Whatever. It didn't matter if the other gods were cheating. A human was still the one fighting. The rules were certified by the universe. The 13 summoned to represent humanity had to be human. If a god went up, it would trigger the rules and expose them. Back in the arena, the fight was taking a new turn, and everyone held their breath. It looked like the winner was about to be decided. Chapter 60. You are listening at novelfull.audio. One fighter hefted a massive thunder hammer, looking incredibly heavy, while his opponent's halberd seemed much lighter. They traded blows, weapons flashing, their speed seemingly matched, but that very fact highlighted the hammer wielder's superior strength. If he had a lighter weapon, his speed would skyrocket, and his opponent wouldn't stand a chance of parrying. Some gods watching commented that if the hammer wasn't so heavy, the human wouldn't be able to hold his own. Basically, some gods thought it was a bit of an unfair match. However, only Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, could handle his immense power. It was perfectly suited to him, allowing him to unleash his full potential. Any other weapon would simply crumble in his grasp, so there was no real unfairness, and besides, there's no such thing as absolute fairness anyway. Thor himself was loving it. After so long, he finally found an opponent who could push him to his limits, letting him enjoy the fight to the fullest. He gripped Mjolnir tighter, as if the hammer itself groaned under the strain. "Give me more!" Thor roared, increasing his speed, veins bulging in his arms. "You got it!" The halberd-wielding warrior responded with equal ferocity, matching his pace. Their weapons collided faster and faster, the heat generated turning the ground cherry red, close to melting. For a moment, the halberd looked like it couldn't take much more. It glowed an intense red, radiating heat. It felt like it could shatter at any moment, but he couldn't falter, couldn't slow down even a fraction. If he did, Thor's hammer would shatter him like cheap china. "I see. Found it?" Yeah, Xiangyu, the overlord, had figured out why Thor was swinging faster and faster. Thor's hammer swings were like drawing a circle, accelerating with each rotation. If it continued, he wouldn't be able to keep up. He began calculating, predicting every movement, every subtle twitch of Thor's muscles, every environmental factor. He calculated the deviation of each swing, the increase in speed and power. Having done that, he could see through Thor's attack pattern, almost predicting the future. The time he squeezed out by predicting wasn't enough to dodge completely, but it was enough to disrupt Thor's swing pattern, interrupting its acceleration with centrifugal force. But this high-speed calculation put an even greater strain on him. But damn, this was exhilarating. This kind of fight was incredible. This was the first time Yu had fought with such abandon since arriving in this world. He needed to push his perception system even further to react better. Of course, that would increase the burden, but it was a burden he welcomed. After all, this body wasn't human and didn't have the rush of hormones triggered by nerves. Bang! Huh! Thor narrowed his eyes. He hadn't expected the opponent to see through his move and disrupt it so quickly. How about this? Lightning erupted from Mjolnir, the added thrust boosting the hammer's speed even further. Not enough. Neither of them was fighting for victory. They were fighting for the sheer joy of it. They were simply reveling in the rare opportunity to face a worthy opponent. They fought in a specially reinforced arena. On Earth, in a human city, the impact of each collision would be a cataclysmic disaster. "Sister Brund, things aren't looking good." Gray, who had been optimistic, now looked anxious. Xiangyu's halberd was clearly inferior to Thor's Mjolnir. If the fight continued like this, the halberd would break first, and the moment he lost his weapon, Xiangyu would be vulnerable to a devastating blow from Thor. Gray nervously darted her eyes back and forth between the arena and a screen. The screen showed a projected battle scene. Why watch the screen when she could see the arena directly? Because her eyes couldn't keep up with their speed. The delayed, slow-motion screen allowed her to clearly see the impact of their weapons, to see which side was losing ground. Watching the changes in the Overlord's halberd made Gray's palms sweat. The audience closest to the arena were on pins and needles as well, not just worried about the fighters, but worried about themselves. The force of the collisions kept sending debris their way. Either a wind blade from the halberd or an arc of lightning from the hammer would fly in their direction. They were terrified of being torn apart or electrocuted. Well, it seems the tide is turning against Overlord Xiangyu. His weapon, it's cracking. Heimdall's voice rose to a shrill cry. The gods' cheers instantly drowned out those of the humans. Here it comes. Heimdall saw the change in Thor's eyes. He was about to unleash his ultimate attack. He saw Mjolnir unleashing even more terrifying lightning, the color shifting from white to black. Boom. A deafening roar and a terrifying shockwave swept outwards, causing screams from the audience, not because they were hurt, but because the impact was so immense. It was like a massive earthquake, shaking the very earth. Heimdall himself was momentarily panicked. He couldn't see what was happening in the arena, because the impact had distorted the air and light, stirring up dust. He couldn't tell how damaged the arena was, but from his vantage point outside the arena, he felt like the ground was about to collapse. The arena was on a giant island suspended in the air. He was terrified that this blow would pierce it or cause it to sink. It seemed that the center of the arena had fallen silent. Had the winner been decided? Who had won? Who had lost? One man swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the gradually dispersing smoke and dust. Who was still standing. Chapter 61. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The smoke thinned, slowly revealing a figure. Then, a deafening cheer erupted from the god's side of the arena. No need to see clearly. The sledgehammer clutched in that figure's hand made it obvious who stood there. Thor, the strongest thunder berserker in Nordic mythology. Called it. Lord Thor was always gonna win. Humans, no matter how strong, can't beat Lord Thor. That hit must have wiped him out. The god's side went wild. So, Ragnarok's first battle is decided, right? The winner is, that the announcement cut off abruptly. Heimdall narrowed his eyes, peering into the dissipating smoke. He saw another figure, still standing. Xiangyu, humanity's champion, was alive, surviving such a devastating blow from Thor, and remaining on his feet, was beyond comprehension. Even a major god wouldn't dare take that hit head-on, and this human not only survived, but could still stand. Did he possess power on par with a god? Maybe it was a glancing blow, but even a graze meant the opponent was powerful enough to evade a direct hit. Very few gods could dodge an attack like that. Impossible. Seriously, that the gods noticed the other figure, and a little relief flickered through the human side. The smoke vanished like sea foam, revealing Thor first, but just as the gods were about to erupt in celebratory cheers, their expressions froze, their hands halting mid-air. They saw the blood. Thor's blood. A clean wound stretched across his left shoulder and chest, another across the right side of his abdomen. The blood flowed freely. He was seriously injured. Had Thor been defeated? No, he was still standing. Not defeated, but, at a disadvantage. Badly wounded by his opponent. The other guy had to be injured too. Maybe even worse. The dissipating smoke revealed something on the ground over on humanity's side. Metal fragments. The human's weapon had broken. Thor's was intact. That meant the human was finished, as the smoke cleared completely on the human side. Ha! Thor won. He lost. Some gods shouted in triumph. The smoke cleared, revealing Xiangyu, smoking, as if scorched by electricity. He was more seriously injured than Thor. I knew it. No way Thor was at a disadvantage. I knew. A god, excitedly rambling, stopped short. An eerie silence had fallen, broken only by gasps. What? He opened his eyes and looked. At first, nothing seemed amiss. The human champion was blackened, like he'd been fried. But something was off. His pupils dilated in horror. The burnt flesh was peeling away, revealing the structure underneath. If it were a normal person, it would be raw muscle and bone, but that wasn't what terrified him. The structure wasn't charred muscle. There was no muscle. Just machinery, like a robot from a sci-fi movie, stripped of its skin. But this machine looked brutal, designed for war, like a demon. Closer inspection revealed that it was even larger than it had been under the skin, as if some internal restraints had been released. It wasn't as if internal restraints had been released. The body had undergone a transformation, the most obvious change. It now had 4 arms, but 2 were broken, presumably destroyed by Thor. One of the remaining arms held a sword that glimmered faintly. A final drop of blood slid from its tip. More blood should have clung to the blade, but the surface was too smooth. It all dripped away. That sword must have caused the wound on Thor's chest. Sister Brend, what is that? Gray's voice trembled. Xiangyu, the champion fighting for humanity, now looked like a mechanical demon. The sight was overwhelming, unsettling. That is Xiangyu, the overlord of Western Chu, Brunhild answered, knowing exactly what she was asking. She was shocked. The mechanical body itself was on the level of an artifact. It was a walking, talking, god-killing artifact, that made Brunhild shudder at the thought of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. She couldn't imagine what would happen when he entered the arena. What kind of heresy is this? What kinda messed up monster? The crows, once so loud and arrogant, felt a chilling pressure. Their voices were no longer boastful, but trembled. Loki chuckled, a strange sound. The laugh lacked its usual smugness. Now, there was only caution. The Valkyries turned themselves into artifacts for others to wield. This human created a weapon comparable to an artifact. No, anything that powerful was an artifact. He created an artifact, then injected human consciousness to bring it to life. Living artifacts weren't unheard of, Thor's Mjolnir, for example. But this was different. This was an artifact with human intelligence. The gods had studied the possibility of creating inhuman artifacts, but they had never succeeded. They could never reach the same level as Thor, a divine weapon capable of standing against gods. A divine weapon like that could wound even a god's soul, causing it to crumble. How had humanity managed to do it? Who was the one who created this monster? If humans mastered this technology, it would be bad news for the gods, but it was impossible. Humans couldn't possess this kind of knowledge. It must be the help of some other pantheon.